Okay, a good systems administrator has a lot of tools in his or her tool bag in order to defeat intruders and attackers from their network or their workstations. And one of these that's come along in the last 10 or 15 years is something called the Honeypot. And the Honeypot is a little different from things like intrusion detection systems and firewalls, because essentially what it's doing is you're creating an artifact that you're using to deceive potential intruders and attackers. And it's a really neat way to try to protect your systems. So what is the problem with respect to an attacker or an intruder? Well, we all know that attacks against computer networks cost corporations and governments billions of dollars each year, and that's from attempted intrusions, distributed denial of service attacks, computer viruses and worms, and so on. However, what the tools that systems administrators have right now are primarily on the defensive end, is that you're trying to defend by putting up another layer of defense, such as a firewall or an intrusion detection system. And the problem is, as you know, is that everyone is a target, because even the grandmas and grandpas that don't have any perhaps useful information on their computers can be used as a zombie, and an intruder can download a worm or a Trojan horse in their system in order to try to implement a denial of service attack. So it's not just the banks and the governments that are targets, everybody's a target. And of course the environment is constantly changing. Is it new applications, new operating systems, new computer systems are being put on the web, so it's very difficult to try to keep up with all the different changes that occur. So what is a honeypot? And I just said add this to Lance Spitzner wrote a book about honeypots. In fact, he wrote a couple, and I would highly recommend them. But what honeypot is a resource, essentially a computer whose value is in being attacked or compromised. Essentially what we're saying is that you want to put something out there on the network that intruders and attackers can see, and you want it to be attacked. And that's kind of obviously different from what we normally think of as a systems administrator job and as a defensive posture for their workstations. Here we want something to be very attractive because we want it to be attacked, and we want it to be attacked for several reasons, as we will talk about a little later. So this means that a honeypot is expected to get probed, attacked, and even potentially exploited. And the great thing about this is that we can learn a lot from these probes, attacks, and exploits. What we can do is essentially learn from the attacker what they're doing and why they're doing it. Unfortunately, honeypots do not fix attacks. They not remove attacks from other resources. However, they do provide additional valuable information. So what does a honeypot architecture look like? Well, we see here we've got a network set up, and we have some production systems, some workstations or servers over here. We have the internet coming in through a router over here. Notice over here we have something called a honeypot sensor. Now this is a system that's sitting out there, and it's essentially just routing packets from this router onto these systems right here called honeypots. And notice that these are there's a reason that these are in this sort of graphical format, because these can be actual systems, workstations, or they can be phantom workstations. Either way, these really don't hold any useful information on them. However, there's ways of making these look attractive to an attacker. So essentially what we want is we want the attackers to get in here. They may probe and do a reconnaissance on this entire network, and they see these systems, but we've set up these systems so that they're much more attractive to be attacked. Notice here, connected to this network is a log server. What this is doing is this is taking the logs and saving them for later use and research. The HoneyNet sensor here is going to have an intrusion detection system on it. What it's doing is it's seeing all the traffic that's going in and out of this system. So again, what we're showing here is the reason we're calling it honeypot is that we want these to be the honey. We want these to be very attractive. We want these to have, for example, services running on them that most people will know may be vulnerable and exploitable. These will be tied down, very securely tied down. So where do you think the attackers and intruders are going to spend most of their time? They'll spend it over here, which is great because these don't have any real information on them. So what are we doing? We're protecting our network through deception. It also allows us to have an early detection of potential attacks that are occurring, potential intrusions, and maybe even allow us to prevent attacks. Also, by gathering this information, for example, the information that we see here that's on the log server, which shows you the types of packets that are going in between the internet and the honeypots, it tells you the kinds of things that an attacker is running, which could allow you to go back and actually change some of the security mechanisms on these production systems. We also maybe understand the attacker's motives. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to drop a Trojan on these honeypots? Are they trying to see what type of valuable information are on the honeypots? Do they just want this as a jumping off point to another attack? And so on. So what is the value in having these honeypots compromised? Well, the great thing is it draws them away from your real resources. Is that essentially you have real resources, you have fake resources that look very attractive. Well, if the attacker is spending all their time throwing things at something that's not real, a virtual resource, then they won't have enough time or energy or resources to try to attack your valuable resources. Also, we're able to monitor what they're doing with the security, knowing there's nothing that's really valuable on those machines. However, we have to be careful in how we set this up because it can't be obvious that these machines are not valuable. So we need to prepare ourselves for that. And also we can learn more about the hackers so you can better defend your network. You know what they're doing and potentially their motives. That is, why they're doing it. So remember, there are, and this is not exactly correct because in some instances there are, we may have services that are running on these computers. If they're real computers, if they're phantom computers, as we'll see later on, there's ways to set this up. They aren't real services, but it certainly appears that, for example, you may have a web service running, or Telnet, or FTP, or RPC, something like that, that the hacker could look at and say, wow, that could be a vulnerability. I'm going to find out if I can get on the system. So if we think about it, let's go back here let's look at this little tidbit right here. Anything sent from the honeypot infers the machine has been compromised because guess what? These machines don't have anything of value on them. Okay? So no one in the business, let's say, or a college or whoever set this up has no need to either know about these systems or to have any access to them. So anyone who actually gets on the system and sends anything out to the internet, that says right away that these have been compromised. And of course, if you think about it, the compromise could be coming from the inside. There could be somebody over here on the production system that's actually breaking in through here. It really doesn't matter because anything that's going out through here, we know that something has occurred that shouldn't have, and somebody's on the system that should not be. The only person who needs to be on this system is the systems or security administrator. So how can we use honeypots? Well, they can be set up to imitate your own production environment, as I indicated, and so we're using deception to defend our networks, and this will allow us to discover the vulnerabilities in our environment. Or we can use it for research, and that's what I've done a few years ago. So essentially what I was trying to do is I was trying to see how well a honeypot could mimic an actual system and see what types of exploits that people out on the internet would actually throw against these systems. And it was quite interesting, and it's something that we'll go over a little bit later. So something I've just added. Oh, by the way, this presentation was really given for the Department of Energy Cybersecurity Conference a few years ago. There's also something called a honey token. And what a honey token is it's a file that looks very attractive from an attacker's viewpoint. And this could actually be sitting on a production system. Let's go back over here. So we may not have honeypots, but we may have a production system over here, and we may have a directory that has an attractive name that, let's say, maybe even attractive for the person who is using the system, but they're not. The users don't have access. They're not supposed to have access, or of no use to access that information. Well, if somebody's accessing the information, what does that tell us? Is that they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and there's a potential security problem. And this is just a silly little example I put in here, is that you've got something on a system that says nuclearplans.doc. Well, a couple of ways we can determine whether somebody's accessing that is create an IDS signature that searches for packets containing the key phrases within the document, so that when with egress filtering, that is packets going from inside the network to outside the network, if that's tripped, if that alarm, if that signature is tripped, that indicates that somebody's accessing that document. Or we can look at the access time. So anytime somebody views or copies that document, the access time will be updated. And so if either of those things occur, this is a very simple thing to do, then that's an indication that somebody's accessing that document. However, this isn't foolproof because, for example, the attacker may have, for example, in this instance, he or she may have encrypted the document, and so the IDS isn't going to catch that packet signature. And the access times, there's ways of changing that back to the original date and time so that won't be an indication. Okay, let's get back to full-fledged honeypots. There's varying levels of interaction or sophistication of the honeypots. And the more the attacker can interact with a honeypot, the more information we can gather from the incident, but also the more complex and the more time involved in setting up those honeypots. And so the levels of interaction range from low to high. And the only ones I've ever worked with really are the low to mid interaction honeypot systems. But we'll talk about each one in turn. Okay, the low interaction honeypot is very simple to install, and in fact I'm going to point you to one later on that you can put on your own system. It's pretty neat and it's free. And these systems only provide certain fake, that is emulated, services. So it appears that you're running SMTP, FTP, Telnet, and so on. But this is no real operating system that an attacker can operate on. This is not the case in the one that we're going to talk about here later. If you are doing something of this nature, it does minimize the risk, but you gather limited information about the motives of the attacker. And here's a really simple example they can use. If you're running, if you're running Linux or Windows. Here I have a Red Hat Linux 8 system with this private IP address. There are no real services running, and it's fully patched, which means that this is really securely tied down. This is running through an internet intrusion detection system, and then those packets are being forwarded out to the internet. What we can do is that we can use Netcat, and we have talked about that before. It's a simple little tool that transmits TCP or UDP packets across the network, and we can set that up to listen on various ports. So Netcat listen on port 80, Netcat listen on port 23, Telnet. These are just comments over here to the right. And so when somebody scans that computer, what are they going to see? Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about hacker reconnaissance. What do hackers do in order to find out what systems are up and what services are running on those systems? Hackers really want to know three things. This says two things. There's three things. One, what computers are up and running. Two, what operating systems those systems are running. And three, what ports are open, that is, what services are being exposed. If a hacker can gain that information, they can find exploits and run those against the operating systems and the services. And one of the great tools that's really a system administration tool, but it's also used for hacker reconnaissance, is Nmap, and that's freely available. It's an open source tool. But they may run something like this: Nmap dash small s capital S, which is a TCP send stealth scan, and over ports 1 to 100 for this range right in here of IPs. And this dash capital O means that they want to fingerprint the operating system. That is, they want to find out what operating system is running on these systems. And so let's get back to this system right here. So we're going to be protecting ourselves and essentially trying to fake out the hackers by running netcat on these ports, so it emulates HTTP and Telnet. And so when a hacker runs this so what the hacker's doing is he or she is running this stealth scan and fingerprint against all computers in this subnet right in here. And so they're going to find that this computer is up and running, and the fingerprinting scan, the fingerprint, is going to tell them that this is a Linux kernel 2.4.18. So it's going to be in the Red Hat 8 similar time frame. And the ports that are open are going to indicate that port 80 is up and port 23. So there may be exploits that are available for, let me see if I can get this in the center. There we go. For this operating system. However, this is very low risk because we already know that the machine is fully patched. It's running no real services. Although the hacker assumes that the open ports are normal services, although it's only netcat listening. And so any attempted connections are being captured by the intrusion detection system and are logged, which is what is occurring here. So we know that the Nmap scan is going to go through here, and then anything else that's thrown through here is going to be captured by the intrusion detection system. The likelihood of someone being able to hack this box is very low because right now we know that there's no real services running and it's fully patched. Okay, a mid-interaction honeypot provides a little more interaction with the system. Recall over here that, for example, because Telnet is running, the attacker may try to Telnet to port 23, but there's going to be no response because it's really netcat listening. And so the attacker really can't interact in any way with the system. The mid-interaction honeypots provide more interaction. The services are still emulated. However, you can provide scripts that allows the attacker to interact just a little bit more with the system. That is, the system will actually respond to some packets that are thrown at it. Realize that having a mid-interaction honeypot means that the development time in management and maintenance time is going to be more complex and time-consuming. It requires higher knowledge, higher skill levels, and we'll have an example of that a little later. The example we're going to talk about is called honeyd, and that's freely available. You can download it. I haven't used it in a couple of years, but it's still available, and I think there's been a lot of work still being done on it. Once again, we have the same system over here. No services running. It's fully patched, a Red Hat 8 system. Of course, in real life, there's no way you would use a Red Hat 8 system now because they stopped updating that some time ago. So you would use whatever the most updated version of the Linux distribution you use. What honeyd does, it's a service that runs as a daemon, and it allows you to configure emulated not only machines but also services running on those machines. So for instance, this Red Hat server, when I was using it, we had it set up to run 4 different to look like it appeared to run 4 different systems. Bear with me for a moment because it's a little difficult to explain. But first of all, notice that this IP of the Honeypot is 192.168.1.45. We set the system up so that it appeared that 2 other systems were on this network. One was 192.168.1.123, the other .124. This one appeared to be a Windows NT server with running SP3, which at that time was obsolete, and it had port 23 and port 21 open, Telnet and FTP respectively. The Linux Red Hat 6.2 server on .124 appeared to be running as a web server, and also was running Telnet. Now you may ask yourself, how is this possible? How could you have this single computer actually be responding to packets that were being sent to .123 and 124 when its IP was .45? Well, essentially, you have to run a second daemon, which is called ARPD. And what ARPD does is it does the address resolution protocol, of course, is that you set it up so that any ARP requests that go out for .123 or .124 are actually going to be sent to .45. And so then honeyd would take those packets that are supposed to be for 123 and 124 and actually interact with those as it would as if the system was running Windows NT or Linux Red Hat 6.2. So from the attacker's viewpoint, it appears that the system, the network, looks like this. You have the real Linux system here running kernel 2.4.18, and the only system, it's fully patched, and the only thing you have running on here is SSH. However, this system is actually emulating 2 other systems, a Windows NT system and an older Linux system 2.2, which is obsolete. And so when the attacker comes in and he or she nmaps these systems, which does it appear may be the most vulnerable? Well, this one's running 2 services that are potentially vulnerable, and this system is running 2 services that are potentially vulnerable. Also, this one is not fully is not up to date, patched. It's got old patches. I mean, right now the most up to date patch for Windows NT is 6, and you have a very old Linux kernel. So you would think that the attacker would know this and would spend most of their resources trying to attack these systems. So the attacker would once again run this using nmap. They would see this system, they would see this system, and they would see this system. So these would be comparatively more attractive because there's more exploits that exist for these services. Okay, finally there's the high interaction honeypot. So under this system, we've actually got a workstation that we're going to be left vulnerable. It's not going to be fully patched, and it's going to be running services and older versions of services, and we want this to be attacked. The problem with that is it's higher risk, because now what we're saying is that we'll flip right back here to take a look at this. Is that now we're saying this is going to be a real system. This is going to not be a phantom system, but it's going to look like a computer that's running an old unpatched operating system with old non-updated services. And so we want somebody to attempt to break into here because we've got all our real valuables sitting over here. And so in this case, we may still have, now we've got a Red Hat Linux 6.2, which is chock full of vulnerabilities, and they may be running port 23 and port 80, and it's unpatched, and therefore we want the attacker to be trying to break into here. The problem is if they do break into here, that can be used as a waypoint to attack other systems, either on your network or the internet. So there's something called downstream liability, and that is that it's a legal term that means that you must use due care in securing your systems, because if somebody breaks into one of these systems and uses it as a waypoint to attack somebody else, then you can be held liable. So you need to be very careful about this, and you would have to set up your intrusion detection system so that it immediately send an alarm to you or a page so that you could either take this system down or monitor whatever the attacker was doing. And so again, if the attackers ran nmap, the same command, the only thing they're going to see is .145. Actually, wasn't this? Whoops. I think this was .45. They're going to see that it's an old Linux kernel. It's an old version of Red Hat with port 23 and 80 open. It's high risk, however, because the hacker is going to interact with a real operating system running real services. They can actually break into the system because the system is unpatched. And of course, this kind of system would require constant monitoring. Now let's look at a couple of Honeypot solutions. The one you can download yourself and run under Windows is called Back Officer Friendly. It's a low interaction honeypot, and it emulates up to 7 services, including FTP, Telnet, SMTP, HTTP, POP3 IMAP. And it also listens for the back orifice Trojan. So BOF is primarily a detection technology, since you cannot add or configure services. But it's still kind of neat, because what it does is it will still capture someone trying to interact with these services. It can run on both Windows and Unix. And it's most popular for Windows because of the ease of installation and use, and you can just download it. Google for it, download it, and run it. It's quite simple. And it offers very little risk because of the low interaction. That is, these services are not really running. However, you could be running other services on your computer that could lead the attacker to attempt to exploit those vulnerabilities, those services. Oops, sorry. And this is what it looks like running. So back officer friendly. You can listen for the back orifice Trojan. It tells you to listen for all these others, so you can just listen to any of those or all of those. It can also fake replies, as you'll see in a second, so it does offer some limited interaction. And here we see I've got back officer friendly running, then I run a netstat, and it indicates that 21, 23, 25, I'm running everything in here, both on TCP and UDP ports. And so it's listening. And here I'm on another computer, and I'm attempting to telnet into that server. Notice I'm telnet here. It says trying, connected, escape character is. Then I'm trying to log in. Well, it's always going to say the login is incorrect, because this isn't a real telnet server, and there's no way I can log into it. But what it's doing is it's providing these prompts so that it appears that there's actually a telnet service running on this computer. Okay, then if you go in and look at the logs, notice it says telnet connection from and so on. It even indicates the password and username that was attempted. Okay, the other honeypot solution we're going to talk about is honeyd. It's a low to mid interaction honeypot, because especially the new version of it, because it does allow more interaction. It's an open source solution for Unix, and as again I said, I used it a few years ago, and it's pretty simple to set up, and it allows you to emulate several different operating systems and services. And in fact, you can emulate an entire network with a single computer. It can detect connections on any TCP or UD port you set up, and it can configure the services, and of course all the services are going to be emulated. honeyd can assume the identity of any open IP addresses where no valid system exists. Realize that if you've got, you can't have two of the same IPs on the same network, so just realize that you need to use IPs that are not being used by other computers, real computers. And it can also monitor all addresses that it's assuming. And what honeyd provides is something called pre-configured personalities, and that is it's systems that it's able to emulate. And essentially it's emulating the operating system's TCP stack. And hold on a second. And then what we used for the intrusion detection system was Snort, and that's something that you saw in the previous class, and we'll use it a little again in this class. Once again, it's an open source network intrusion detection system. There's ports available for Windows, Linux, and the Macintosh. And of course, it can be configured to capture all network activity and alert to anything suspicious. It offers real-time alerting, and it has three primary uses, as we learned last semester, as a packet sniffer, a packet logger, or a full-blown intrusion detection system. Okay, what did we do for our research? Let's take a look at the honeyd configuration file. Once again, honeyd is a daemon that's running in the background, and this is a configuration file that indicates what type of computers we're setting up and what services we're running. So here we see we create a profile called Windows up here, and we have one called Linux down here. And then we set the Windows personality to Windows 2000 Server with Service Pack 2. We give the default actions for TCP for a port that's not open. So for Windows, that's a reset. And then we add here a Perl script that actually will emulate some interaction if somebody is trying to attempt to connect to port 80. Note this is an IIS Perl script. And then we're opening up some of the Samba ports, 35, 137, 139 on TCP and UDP. We indicate the uptime for Windows. This is a joke. It's 100, which would be a few seconds. And then we're binding this Windows profile to the IP 137 dot whatever. That's obfuscated. That's obviously not a real IP address. Down here in Windows, in the Linux section, we're setting the personality of Linux 2.2.14, an obsolete Linux kernel. The default TCP and UDP actions. Here we're opening up ports 110 for POP, 25 for SMTP, and 21 for FTP. And notice that it also has scripts involved with it. So if somebody wants to attempt to telnet to 21, 25, or 110, that it actually would provide some sort of interactivity. And then we set the uptime to be something reasonable, several weeks or whatever. And then we bind this personality to a specific IP address. So now on this one computer running honeyd, it's actually emulating two different other computers, a Windows 2000 server and a Linux server. This is something from the nmap.prints file, and what this is it's the fingerprints for the Windows 98 TCP stack, and a fingerprint for Linux kernel 2.4.16 to 18 stack. And this essentially is what allows in the honeyd to emulate the TCP stack of these operating systems, and there's dozens and dozens within this file right here in map.prints. So that's already configured for you. Let's see, here's some more honeyd.scripts. I'm not going to go too far into this. This is just creating another template, setting the personality to Windows NT4 with Service Pack 3. You're opening up SMTP and FTP, and then it's got the shell scripts that are used to emulate some sort of interaction. This is a mistake we made when we first started running this, is because we set this up to, let me see here just for a second. We set this up to look like it was a Linux kernel 2.2, and then we attempted to telnet into it, and the shell script actually told us, sent back this right here, which indicated it was a sendmail 8.12.2.8 on SUSE Linux 0.6, which is something that was not correct. And this is just one of the scripts right here that came with honeyd. Here it's setting the date, setting the host name, the domain name, where the log files are located, mail from, hello, what it's going to echo when it's okay. Then up here, from another computer, we ran nmap, and we tried to see what we got back from this. And notice that it says interesting ports, and it's showing some of the ports that are open. And this is actually on another run of a honeyd where we were emulating 4 other systems. We were running here, notice an AIX system, FreeBSD, Windows 98 with Service Pack 1, and Windows NT 4 with Service Pack 3. And it indicates that we were that each one of these had several different services that it was running. Okay, that's going to end this class. The next class we're going to finish up with this and show how we set up Snort, and shows you all the different attacks that that we received from the systems. And it was amazing because people were just throwing attacks at us left and right.